gentlemen. Woo! Listen to that theme. Keep it rolling. Keep it rolling. We here. Yeah. All right, let it play out. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first episode of the Unofficial Jacksonville Jaguars Podcast. My name is Seth Studer. Now, I've been told that it is sometimes rude to speak in sentences that begin with the word I, but I'm going to break that rule right now. I am an associate attorney here at Campione Law. I am an avid Jacksonville Jaguars fan. I am bringing the first episode of this podcast, and I need therapy. I need therapy. I need therapy because I have been in a, let's call it an emotionally abusive relationship with this team for the last 30 years. And I expect that a lot of you have been in that same relationship. And man, this relationship sucks. It sucks. It is so tough to be excited. However, I know I need therapy. I know I'm crazy because I am excited for the 2025 season again. Again. They say that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Well, if that's the case, then I'm cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I'm crazy. Because I'm excited again. They dupe me. How can they do this to me every single year? Last year I was excited. And what did that give us? Well, it gave us, 4-win, 5-win team, whatever the hell it was, and, top 5 draft pick. And sure enough, I'm sitting here today and I'm excited. But why am I excited? Why are you excited? They're home. If I'm crazy, you're probably crazy too, right? So, we're looking forward to, putting on some great content. And we can get up here and on our first episode, we can talk about Liam Cohen. We can talk about Trevor Lawrence. Will the 5th year be the year he breaks out? We can talk about our defense not sucking donkey genitalia and being last in the league. We can talk about Zaddy Gladstones and that big trade for Travis Hunter. We can talk about Travis Hunter. Hey, how much has he got to play on both sides of the ball? But you know what? Because I need therapy, because I need Prowler Prozac, because I need Duval dopamine, let's step back. Let's step back. And so for the first episode, let's not make it easy. Let's make it hard. Because I need therapy. And where does therapy start usually? Well, it starts by looking back in your past and figuring out how the hell did we get here. So today, for our first episode, we have a very special episode here. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Campione Law for allowing me to do this thing and, air my rantings out to the mass public. We do great work here, personal injury firm, and, bad things happen to good people all the time. If something bad happens, just feel free to give us a call. We'll be happy to help you out. But back to our regularly scheduled programming. First episode, let's look back. And this is going to be episode 1 of a 3-part series about the history of the Jaguars. And today we're going to talk about, Tom Pelly said, glory days. We're talking about glory days, the Tom Coughlin era. The season's 1995 throughout the season of 2002. So we've established a couple things that I need therapy, that you all need therapy too, and that we're going to be looking back. And, a lot of you listeners may, know the history back to front and all that kind of stuff. And some of y'all actually maybe don't. So maybe I'm here to educate you on kind of, the early years of the Jaguars, what happened and all that kind of good stuff. But for y'all that already know that, and that's old news, and why y'all listening in to someone ranting and raving about, stuff that happened, 25 plus years ago, Let's think about this. In order a lot of times to understand the history, you have to compare it to something else. And maybe through that comparison, through that metaphor, as we like to use in my day-to-day when I'm arguing in front of juries, using metaphors and other things to try to recapture and understand where we came from. So, instead of talking about September 3rd, 1995, which was, I think, the Jaguars' inaugural game against the Houston then Oilers, instead, we're going to go back in time a little bit. We're not going to go back in time a little bit. We're going to go back in time a lot of bit. But we're not moving far. We're moving, about 45 minutes south down in St. Augustine. Instead of September 1995, I'm going to talk to you about September 8th, 1565. 430 years prior to the Jaguars' first game. Well, what was that? That was the founding of the oldest city, European founded in the United States, being St. Augustine. Well, and who founded St. Augustine? Well, the Spanish Empire. And the Spanish Empire, by that time in 1565, what did they own? Well, they owned Spain. They owned many parts of Italy. They owned the Netherlands. They owned and controlled much of the southeastern United States, all of Central America, down through the Panama Canal. But you got control Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, parts of Chile, all the way up to California. And they did this in a matter of 60 years. 60 years they were able to rule nothing into a supernova. It was the first empire where the sun never set. Oh yeah, they ended up owning the Philippines at that time too. How does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar to a certain team that exploded like a supernova onto the scene? Well, yes. So I'm going to do an historic, extended metaphor between the Jaguars in these years to the rise and the apex of the Spanish Empire. But let's get back to football and let's get back to sports before we go too deep in and get my nerd glasses on. I would say, and I have a reasonable argument to say, that the Jacksonville Jaguars had the most successful 5 years to start their franchise out of any of the big four sports: hockey, baseball, basketball, NFL. Well, who are some other contenders? Well, let me just give you a couple of facts here about the Jaguars. In their first 5 years, 4 playoff appearances, 2 conference championship appearances, a best record of 14-2 in 1999, and an overall winning percentage of just over 61%. There's some other arguments for some other teams. You could say, well, what about the Carolina Panthers? They made that's a football team. They made a early championship appearance. Well, no, yes, they did, but they made 1 playoff appearance and 1 conference championship appearance in the year 1996. You can go, well, Seth, what about the Florida Marlins, the Miami Marlins, the Florida Marlins? You remember them? That's when that game against the Cubs, where that poor Cubs fan caught it over Moises Alou back in 1996. They won the World Series. How can the Jaguars' first 5 years be better than theirs? Well, the Florida Marlins had a winning percentage of about 47%, only went to the playoffs 1 time, and they won it all. Not 4 times. Not sustained success. I think actually the best argument would actually be two teams, would be the Arizona Diamondbacks, who made the playoffs 3 times and won the whole shebang once. It's an argument. The other one would be the Vegas Golden Knights. Well, I really don't consider, I'm not much of a hockey fan. I guess you would consider them part of the Big Four, but even them, they made 4 playoff appearances and a conference championship appearance too, just like the Jaguars. Now, I would say that the Vegas has the best 6-year run, but when it comes to 5-year runs, first 5 years, I think the Jacksonville Jaguars really, really have an argument to make. So what the hell happened? How did we get here? What caused its collapse? So now we're going to take you back into time one more time. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? 1492. Well, that was the start of the Spanish Empire. And just like the Jaguars had Wayne and Dolores Weaver, well, Spain had, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Now, I forget which one ruled which. I think back then it wasn't Spain. It was 2 kingdoms. Queen Isabella ruled the kingdom of Castile, and King Ferdinand ran the kingdom of Aragorn. Sounds like a Lord of the Rings thing, doesn't it? Eventually, they joined forces together in the late 1400s. And then, what a lot of folks don't know is, until that time, Spain and the Iberian Peninsula, right there, Spain, Portugal, had been ruled up to that time by Muslims and the Islamic Empire. And slowly but surely they were pushed out. But 1492 does not just note the dates that Columbus first set sail. It also marks the date that Queen Isabel and King Ferdinand, the Spanish forces, finally were able to get rid of the Muslim-conquered lands by conquering the Kingdom of Granada. So it's a brand new country we're talking about. And just like Wayne and Dolores Weaver were able to start the Jaguars out of the 58th largest market in the United States, Spain was running with pretty slim pickings there at the time too. So, in the story about how Jacksonville was able to get and win a NFL franchise. That's another story, but it is a riveting one. I mean, there was peaks and valleys, and man, we were very close to not even having a team in the first place. But obviously, first season, 1995. And, when you're an expansion team, you're literally nothing. Well, you get one of the top picks in the draft. And we didn't even get the first pick. We got the second pick. But with that second pick, man, we hit it out of the park by drafting left tackle out of USC, Tony Boselli. I use Tony Boselli because that's the most Italian name I've ever heard in my life. And you ever meet the guy, he's very much doesn't come off like that. But we draft Tony Boselli, and he ends up being our first Hall of Famer ever. Man, he was a stalwart at left tackle, and we couldn't have picked a better one. So I think, Tony Boselli for us is like Christopher Columbus to the Spanish Empire. Now, Christopher Columbus went up and said, hey, listen, I got this crazy idea. I'm going to keep sailing that away so I can get, gold and riches and develop a trade route there with the Indies, the Indonesia, India, hopefully. And the Portuguese actually heard Columbus first. And the Portuguese were like, no, man, we're good. No, we've been sailing, under the South Africa and going that way. We're fine. We're good. But Spain, they're a little desperate. And they're like, you know what? Christopher Columbus. And just like hiring, an Italian and Christopher Columbus, we drafted an Italian and Tony Boselli. And damn, it worked. Damn, it worked, didn't it? So Columbus shows up there in the New World, I think on the island of what's now Hispaniola, which is Dominican Republic and Haiti. And he meets, And he thinks he's sailing to India, and he meets the natives there, and he, of course, does not call them Native Americans. He calls them Cleveland Guardians. No, I'm kidding. They called them Indians. But what he was able to do and open up was exactly what Tony Boselli was able to do for his team. He was the face of the expansion Jaguars. And I mean, we got Columbus Day here. They named a day after him. Well, shoot, McDonald's, little did you know, named the Boselli burger. They're at McDonald's for him. I think it's 3 beef patties. I think I had a McRib on it, something like that. But he was an institution, and that's who's remembered. And for us, finally, he was selected into the Hall of Fame here quite recently, and we couldn't be more proud of Tony Boselli ourselves. But Jaguars still have football to play. So finally we got kickoff there in 1995. In the first year, we don't do great. But we don't do that bad either. We end up going 4-12. Yeah, well, Seth, that sounds pretty bad. It is. But given that we're an expansion team and given that we lost 6 of those games by 1 possession or fewer, I thought it was a pretty good start. We showed up, we competed. And we had a tough coach. More on him later. But okay, Spain's like, hey, we got a couple of islands out there. I don't know what we have. I don't know what they have, but it looks like they have gold. It looks like they have riches. So let's build on it. And that's what the Spanish Empire did, and well, that's what Jacksonville did too. And they built on it in a hell of a way with the 1996 season. 1996 is just such a fever dream, looking back on it for the Jaguars. It's a fever dream because of how they started. You're sitting there 11 weeks into the season, you're 4-11, and there's pretty much no hope that you're gonna do anything. I mean, which is fine for an expansion team. Absolutely fine. We talked about the other ones earlier. That's okay, but something weird happens. And they get the right pieces of luck, and they start going on a winning streak. They don't win 1 game. They're 5-7, not 2, not 3. Now they're 7-7, not 4. They're 8-7. Last game against the Falcons. And the Falcons that year were not a good team. And they came into Duval County, and they were winning. And we came back, and finally we had a very tenuous lead going on to the 4th quarter. And if we lose this, we're out. If we win, we're in our 2nd year. And that's where luck, something undefined, something ephemeral, you can't really put your mind on it, happens. And it reminds me of something similar that happened about, 20, 25 years after Columbus. So, 1511, the Spanish have taken over Cuba. They sent out a vessel, and they don't hear back. Nothing happens. For some reason, undefined to me, they wait like 7, 8, 9 years later before sending out a search party for this vessel that was, disappeared on, foreign, completely unknown soil, several years prior. And the first, rescue mission comes back, no dice. And so for the second rescue mission, they send out a man by the name of Hernán Cortés. I'm just going to call him Hernán Cortés. I just want to at least get it, get in there once how you're supposed to pronounce it, I think. So, Hernán Cortés comes over and he starts sailing, trying to find this lost ship. And sure enough, after a couple of skirmishes, he comes across one of the Mayans, the Mayan people. that lived there on the Yucatan Peninsula. And sure enough, they're talking, and he's able to establish friendly contact. And there was someone who looks mildly like a Spanish citizen just there. And by God, they found one of the survivors from that crash 7 years ago. But he's not able to communicate with the Mayans. But fortunately, this gentleman, he was some sort of priest, knew the language, knew Spanish, and also developed many different forms of Mayan language. So now he has a way to communicate. And long story short, he picks him up, and he continues to sail north. And he sails north, and then he finally decides to stop and go inland, here a little bit north of Yucatan and modern-day Mexico. And he gets off, and man, this Cortés guy, he was nuts. He was nuts in what he had. He had about 500 soldiers. And sure enough, he gets into a battle with some of the natives there, and he is grossly outnumbered, and he fights, and they stop. And then the next day, another wave. They're outnumbered 3-1, and there's another day of fighting. And fortunately, the Spanish had some artillery, some guns, some other things they were able to, but by the end of it, the natives were mighty impressed by this. And what Cortés did, which was very smart at the time, he's very cunning. My understanding is that, right when probably one more battle, he probably can't survive it, he decides to send gifts, gold, antiques, just stuff to the other side and release all the prisoners he had taken as like a blind show of good faith. And the natives saw that and were very intrigued and came up and spoke with them. But how were they able to communicate? Well, I believe these natives were able to gave him 20 or so slaves. And one of those was a lady by the name of Marincha, I believe. I might be completely butchering it. But Marincha was very interesting because she spoke both Mayan and Aztec and all the other languages. And through the priest who spoke Mayan, the priest could speak to Marincha to speak to the natives there. And so he's able to establish like a tin-can telephone line of communication. And that makes all the difference to what happens next. Because we know at the end of the story that Cortés is able to subjugate vast swaths of this Central American, the Aztecs. He conquers them. And how so? He does it through language. And so how lucky did he find a person, a priest, from a shipwreck 7 years prior, and then is able to find a slave that spoke the same language as the priest and be able to communicate so he can be able to later dominate. That's just luck. That's just luck. So fast forward. It's the Falcons. They're driving. Last game of the season. And I think his name was Gary Anderson. I think he was one of the most prolific place kickers in NFL history, has a 29-yard field goal to win the game and to kick and squash the Jaguars' playoffs away. 29 yards. I think they set up from the right hash. And as he kicks, his foot just slips. You can see it on the replay. His plant foot slips and yoinks that thing wide wide left. And the Jaguars get in. And so they get in. But who do the Jaguars get in with? Right? We know about Tony Boselli, but who are some of the other players? Well, we have Brett Favre's backup in Green Bay, who was lighting it up that year by the name of left-hander by Mark Brunell. Still our greatest quarterback in Jaguars history. We also had Jimmy Smith, excellent wide receiver, who I think caught his first touchdown pass, not touchdown pass, but caught his first NFL pass at the age of 26. We also got Keenan McCardell, another wide receiver, lining it up that year. And throughout, we had looking at the stats here. In just that year, in the regular season, Jimmy Smith went for 1,200 yards. Keenan McCardell went for 1,100, which back then, in the 90s NFL, was nothing to sneeze at. We also had a running back. We had James Stewart, who we selected in the expansion in the 1995 draft, and a really big, chonky dude by the name of Natron Means. I think Chris Berman used to be like, Natron Means Business would be his name. He came over from the Chargers. And so we got these little conquistadors here, right? Us against the world. And we go in to the 1996 playoffs. Meanwhile, and kind of thinking about it, Hernán Cortés and Mark Brunell are have a little similarities, right? They're able to, Cortés was able to build alliances as he was, gearing up to go, invade Mexico City. And also, Brunell, in the same thing, for the first year of the team, developed this excellent chemistry and alliances with Jimmy Smith and McCardell, et cetera. And really the biggest thing was Mark Brunell was a slayer. He was the slayer. A couple years later, he would slay, Dan Marino's NFL career and Jimmy Johnson's NFL career. But, during that run, he ended the hopes and dreams of a whole lot of good teams and a whole lot of, Hall of Famers. And Cortés did his own slaying too, needless to say. But the kind of most interesting thing about the Cortés and the Jaguars is this kind of like never look back, us against the world kind of mentality. And so when Cortés was about to go in, it was supposed to be just a rescue mission. Cortés said, screw that. No, we're going to make this a little bit more conquesty, right? And he, upon establishing, I think it's the town of Veracruz, did the most insane thing I've ever heard. He burned down the ships. All the ships he came over with. He's like, no, we're good. We're burning them. There's only one way forward, and that's into the unknown and into trouble, because he wasn't afraid of nothing. And the Jaguars, Brunell wasn't afraid of nothing either. And so we get back, the Jaguars for their first playoff game in 1996, play against the Buffalo Bills. A lot of folks, clown on the Bills now, but man, they won the AFC, 4 years in a row. I think it was like 1990, 91, 92, 93. I mean, these guys were kings. In Jacksonville, go in there and shut them up. He shut them up. And if you watch those highlights, I was talking about Natron Means Business. Boy, I forget. Like, he ran for, 187 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game. He was just barreling over folks. Tony Boselli was matched 1-on-1 against Bruce Smith, Hall of Fame defensive end from Buffalo. And it was a tough game. It was a hard-fought game. Jacksonville prevailed. And then it's like, okay, cool, you did it once. Let's see you do it again. That's a neat little storybook fairy tale. Yeah, let's kind of see you do it again. And who next? But the best team that year, by far, the Denver Broncos, led by John Elway, Terrell Davis, Shannon Sharp. I think you had Bill Romanowski on the other side. Christian McCaffrey's dad, Ed McCaffrey, catching balls as well. I think Rod Smith, too. Mike Shanahan, of course, father of Kyle Shanahan, the 49ers coach. Just a juggernaut of a team. And we got to go in there. And I think Vegas had us at 12.5-point dogs. Meanwhile, in Mexico, Hernán Cortés starts making his way inland and finds a group of natives. These are not the Aztec. They're actually, enemies of the Aztec. And once Cortés was able to prove himself, they go, you know what, let's squad up. We don't like the Aztecs too much either, man. We can maybe help each other. More luck. And Cortés goes, sure, how many you got? He's like, well, you got, 600 men. We got 100,000. So he increased the size of his army by 1,000 times. And he goes in, and I can't get into, I don't want to be the history buff here, but he goes in and he's making, and essentially makes contact with the Aztecs. And he's able to persuade and flatter them using that translator I was talking about, them that they're peace, that, hey, everything's cool, just let us in. And they ended up kidnapping the leader of the Aztecs and holding him hostage. And then a whole bunch of stuff happens where they find out, and long story short, Cortés is driven away from the Aztec capital, and then he comes back, with his other allies, and through attrition and just luck, pure will, determination, and a little bit of help from smallpox, is able to conquer the Aztec Empire within 3 years. I think he starts in 1519, ends in 1521. And, the Jaguars went into Mile High Stadium in early January, no one thinking they're going to win nothing. And they conquered too. And it wasn't easy. You watch that game back, Natron Means pops off another 100-plus yard game, runs for a touchdown. Jimmy Smith, Mark Brunell, I mean, they're just balling out, playing out of their minds. And that was my first Jaguars memory. I remember watching this game. And there was one play in particular. I think they were right at the 50-yard line. I think it's like second and 9. Mark Brunell comes back. There's pressure. He rolls right, looking, and he just swerves in and out of the Denver Broncos defense, slicing and dicing, just making people, looking like White Vic out there, making folk miss, and finally stumbles, at the 21 for a 29-yard gain. And I think we were up by, I want to say, 4 or 5, something like that at that point. But I remember that run, and I just knew right then, it's like, oh my God, we can do this. We can do this. It's easy to think, in today's NFL, you got to be aggressive, make sure you don't kick field goals, you convert touchdowns, all that kind of such. But for that wasn't really the thought process in the mid-90s. And I think it was like third. It was that same drive. After Mark Brunell does that scramble, I think they get to third down. And instead of, just trying to run it, see if you get it, kick the field goal, be up by 7, I think that would have been. No. They throw it. And he throws a perfect pass up the left sideline to Jimmy Smith, who catches it. I think puts us up by 10. John Elway does what John Elway usually does, king of the comeback, marches the Broncos right down the field, scores with under 2 minutes left. But, man, shoot, that last touchdown to Jimmy Smith's what put it in. Because now I think it's only a 3-point ball game. And Jaguars recover the onside kick and win the game. One of the largest, hugest, most stupendous playoff upsets in NFL history. Done by a second-year team. Run by, a hard-nosed coach. And just really kind of a cast of misfit characters, has-beens, nobodies, all that kind of stuff. Comes in, shocks the world. Obviously, as you know, the dream does die. Next week, they go into Foxborough. They're in New England, and they lose to Drew Bledsoe. It was 20-6, but it was actually pretty close at the time being. But, man, the Jaguars had shocked the world. Now, Jacksonville is a team and a city that people are talking about for the first time, and God knows when. Wow. And what's crazy is that, just like the Spanish Empire kind of came from nothing into something. the Jaguars too were able to, kind of expand on that success, right? Because, they didn't just stop there in Mexico. They went up to California and down and conquered the Incas down there in the Andes and Peru. And they had the entire, meat of the New World, the Philippines, and everything I rattled off towards the beginning. Netherlands. I think, their king, Charles V, I think his name was a Holy Roman Empire too. Add that to it. And it's just like, in a blink of an eye, what? They're everywhere. It's huge. And the thing about the Spanish here at this time, they are very Catholic. They are pro-Pope. And which leads into kind of, what's next for Spain. Well, around this time, there was also the Protestant Reformation, where Protestants were happening. And at the end of the 1500s, well, a certain king of England, Henry VIII, wanted to divorce one of his wives, and long story short, he flopped sides. He changed teams from Catholic to Protestant, and that didn't the Spanish didn't like that too much. And the next person after Henry VIII to rule was Queen Elizabeth I. So they had an enemy, the Spanish. They're on their own soil, but they had so much already. But they started to get a little greedy. The Jaguars, meanwhile, are not greedy just yet. But they follow up a great 1996 season with a superb 1997 season. Let's see. Mark Brunell throws over 3,000 yards. Jimmy Smith, 1,300 yards. Keenan Cardell, 1,100 yards. And, however, they get to the playoffs and they win their first division title. They go 11-5, 2 wins better than the previous year. They're getting better. But, well, John Elway's, the last playoff game he lost was against us. Actually, I think John Elway actually called it the worst loss he ever experienced, that one from 1996. Well, he had his revenge in 1997. And they whooped our ass pretty good in the wild card round of 1997. So, but Jaguars ain't done. 1998 comes about. Fred Taylor is drafted out of the University of Florida. Go Gators. In his rookie year, he doesn't just rush for 1,200 yards. He puts in 14 tutties. 14. Rookie year. Jimmy Smith pops off again with another 1,000-yard season. And, man, they go 11-5 again. Win the division again. And now they got a little, pep in their step, too. And they keep expanding. They beat, I believe it was New England. They got their revenge against Drew Bledsoe and company and beat them. And then came up against the New York Jets with Chad Pennington, Keyshawn Johnson, and lost. They had like a 24-7 deficit that they were eventually able to fight back on, but lost by, I think, about 10 points, 34-24. But they keep building. And finally, we get, well, to the apex. Like Prince, 1999. And before we ruminate too much on the 1999 mega season that is the Jacksonville Jaguars, let's go back to España real quick. And that leads us to our last large comparison that we're going to make here. Towards the end of the 1500s, Spain was ruled by, well, a king, but King Philip II. King Philip II was a man that when he gave you instructions, you followed those to the T. He was a micromanager. He was a person who would work as hard as any other monarch. He wasn't great at everything, but he wanted to control everything at all times and continue to build this empire and build this empire and build this empire. And the weird thing is, they literally had mountains of silver in the Andes that they were bringing back. And it was getting so big and they were getting so rich, but to get that money, and to expand costs money. And it was a kind of a weird thing. I think, King Philip II, declared bankruptcy. It's the first, global empire, and you're declaring bankruptcy. And it's just this weird kind of thing where you're having to spend, and you have, rebellions. You have the what's called the 80 Years' War in Netherlands, where the Protestants are trying to be free of the Catholic rule of the Spanish, and, all this money and such. But you're getting literally loads of money here from the New World. And, at the same time, you have these new folks. You have the British trying to steal some territory there in your new hemisphere. I believe the British, take over Jamaica, during this time period, and some other islands. And, heavy lies the crown, But this disciplinarian, this harsh figure of, King Philip II, kind of remind you of someone from the Jaguars? Tom Coughlin, our first coach. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but it's actually Tom Coughlin was the highest paid new coach in the NFL at that time. I think they announced his, he was going to be hired in 1993, like a year and a half or so before he even, played a game. They hired him out of Syracuse. He was a head coach there prior. And Tom Coughlin was the opposite of a player's coach. He had some famous players had to be on Coughlin time. Well, how do you mess with the universe and what is, you have your own time system? You have your own time zone, Tom Coughlin? Yes, he did. If a meeting would start at 10, you would have to be there at 9:55. You would have to be at any meeting 5 minutes prior to its start. Or you were late. 5:56, no good. 9:58, oh, hell no. Coughlin time meant Coughlin time, and you got punished for it. You had to wear I heard Bucky Brooks, who he's a local color guy for the Jags, among other things. He was telling a story that on away games, while they were in the hotel, right, the night before a game or whatnot, if they were outside the hotel, they had to wear slacks and shoes and a button-down long-sleeve shirt, or they would get busted. I mean, whoa. I mean, the Spanish they had the Spanish Inquisition and stuff going on. They're mighty similar on how, damn strict it was. But strict doesn't mean you don't get results. And as we've seen, Tom Coughlin got a hell of a lot of results. But it was one of those kind of things where it seemed like, they all hated him, and it was that shared love of hatred that propelled them forward. It's like, we're going to show this guy what's up. And that's what they did for the first several years of their franchise. And King Philip II, actually that's who the Philippines are named after, was very, very, very strict and pious, and along that same thing. You did not cross him. You did not cross King Philip II. Just as you did not. Hell no, you don't cross Tom Coughlin. Now, Tom Coughlin, as we kind of know him, and we kind of have a view in the future, he eventually coaches 2 Super Bowl victories there with the New York Giants. And it seems like he kind of softened a bit. But man, this was not diet Tom Coughlin in Jacksonville. This was Tom Coughlin classic, Wasn't no Coughlin zero. And but he shaped it. He shaped the team, and he made him perform. But here's another thing that maybe a lot of folk don't know about Tom Coughlin. He was not just the head coach at the time. He was also the general manager, which is interesting. With someone of that ilk, right? Usually you want a general manager to kind of come back and go, hey, listen, we can't spend everything all at once. We have to manage our roster and such so we have sustained success. Well, Tom Coughlin wanted winning more than anything. And, well, going into the 1999 season, it was for everything. But before that, Philip II, too, remember, we're Team Pope. We're in the Catholic class. King Philip II did not like what was going on in England, like I had talked to you about. They were, changed to Protestant, and they were, were labeled as the heretics over there, and the heretic queen, Elizabeth I. So King Philip II goes, you know what? We're going to go all out. We're going to go all out, and I am going to build the biggest fleet in human history to ride across there and stomp them out, and stomp England out, invade England. And I'm going to do it by not just building a fleet. No, not a fleet. I'm going to build an armada. An armada. And that's what he did. In the late 1580s, King Philip II goes, we're going all out. And some say it's about 130 ships. I think new historical estimates place it about 150. But just a huge fleet. And they have an army too. But their army's not in Spain, weirdly enough. The goal, and I don't understand it, is for the Spanish to sail up, go through the English Channel and pick up their army in the present-day Netherlands, in Dunkirk, actually where the British were evacuating in World War II. That's where they were going to be invaded from back in 1588. And Spanish kind of, pick up, 35,000 hitchhikers in the form of an army, and then use that to invade Spain. That was the plan. Meanwhile, let's jump forward back to 1999. The Jaguars now have a loaded roster. Mark Brunell, Jimmy Smith, Keenan McCardell, Fred Taylor, Tony Boselli. You got Kevin Hardy on defense. You got, Tony Bracken's there. You got Carnell Lake, I think, at that time. You got folks and got ballers all over. And we haven't been talking about the defense much, but they changed defensive coordinators in 1999 and hire on Dom Capers. And Dom Capers coached that 1999 defense up well. They were the number one scoring defense in the NFL that year. And let's a couple of other things. They went in a 16-game season 14-2, absolutely running roughshod over the entire league. Brunell, of course, throws for 3,000 more yards. Fred Taylor, a little limited by injury, splits time with James Stewart. They both run about an average of 800 yards each. And Jimmy Smith, 166 receptions, 1,636 yards. Talk about a season. And then Keenan McCardell bringing up another 900. But on defense, too, like before the 1999 season, I think that the person with the most sacks was Clyde Simmons in 1997 with 8.5 sacks. That's 1997. Let's flash forward 2 years later. Defense. Tony Brackens, 12 sacks. Kevin Hardy, 10.5 sacks. Gary Walker, 10 sacks. 3 individual players setting season records for the Jaguars. And, man, they just demolished damn near everyone. So the regular season ends, and, of course, they have the best record in the NFL, the best metrics, clearly the best, I think, best team and the Super Bowl favorites that year. Meanwhile, King Philip II sends out his armada in 1588. Remember, go up, go through the English Channel, pick up an army, invade England. Jaguars in their first playoff game, boat race, demolished. I don't know what. I don't. 62-7 over the Dolphins. 62-7. And that does not, just that score alone does not really do it justice. Let's put it this way. Mark Brunell was subbed out, and the backup was placed in at 12 minutes ago in the first half. And even them, I think it was Jay Fiedler came out and was throwing all over the yard on them. They stomped them. And that was Dan Marino's last game and Hall of Fame Super Bowl winning coach Jimmy Johnson's last game too. And boy, howdy, did they beat the crap out of them. It was, and I remember watching that thing and going, holy crap. Man, we got the best team in the league. And sure enough, remember about 400 years ago, they're sailing up and they got the best fleet in the league. And it's just right in front of them because the Spanish were able to find out that maybe we should go after the English fleet. As opposed to kind of going over and picking up the army, we can just go take out the English fleet right there in Plymouth, just north, and do that. But no. You don't go against King Philip's rules, just like you don't go against Tom Coughlin time, right? And so they pitched it to the Duke, and the Duke said, no. We stick with the plan. And they got through the channel, and it was actually amazing. The Duke in charge of this, it's like Sidonia Morona. I'm just calling him the Duke. But the Duke was able to keep, logistically, to keep 130 to 150 ships in formation and not lose them and not run into each other. Seriously, from a logistical point of view, it was incredibly impressive. And then sail into, through the channel, and they ended up docking right across the English Channel in a place called Calais, France. Meanwhile, 411 years later, the Jaguars have to play the Tennessee effing Titans. I tried not to curse. I almost did it there. OG Jaguars, maybe you all hate the Texans. Maybe you all hate the Colts. But it's the Tennessee Titans that are my most hated team. Because, remember we're talking about 14-2? Their 2 losses were to the Titans. And the Titans, before playing the Jaguars in the playoffs, played in the wild card round and won on a kick return miracle lateral. Was it a forward pass? Wasn't it not a forward pass? And Music City Miracle, look it up. Frankly, the fact that the Titans were even in a spot to even to play us in the playoffs is ridiculous. It really is. You just start thinking about what could have been. Don't get me started. But, well, the British fleet, fortunately doesn't get sunk there in Plymouth and go, oh, shoot, we got ourselves a situation. We've got, I think, 100 to 150 ships kind of sailing around us right now, and they don't look like they have good intentions. And the English try to break up the formation. They do this. The Spanish were in this interesting, formation where they had all their ships lined up in one big crescent. And you got to think about how many and how hard it is to keep that, that logistical, that shape. And they're not able to throw the Spanish as they're entering the channel. And maybe pick off 1 or 2 ships, but nothing. Finally, they dock off Calais, and then it happens. During the Clinton administration, now we're there, the Jaguars play the Titans in the AFC Championship game. Jaguars are far and away favored to win this game. And actually, after a really ugly first half, the Jaguars had the lead. Yeah. And sure enough, the Spanish at that time were going, hey, they may have got one or two, but we're pretty good. We're not bad. We just got to finish the job, get this army, and let's go, conquer the Queen Heretic. And we're like, hey, let's just conquer, Steve McNair and Eddie George, and, we'll be fine. We're at home. We're good. And it's just disaster. It's just disaster. Here in Calais and, the coast of the Netherlands, the English end up sending fire ships, which are just packed with, gasoline and flammable explosive material. And they send, 8 of those off towards the Spanish. And they blow them up. It's kind of like a kamikaze, but back in, 16th century kamikaze ships. Blow them up. Spanish don't lose any folks, but they get unorganized. And finally that vaunted, crescent shape is finally starting to wiggle and waggle. And then throughout the night of, I believe it was August 8th, 1588, and the day of the August 8th, 1588, the British are able to just swarm them and use some smaller, nimbler ships with some more advanced tactics. The British knew how to sail. The Spanish, it was more, new to them. And frankly, the Duke, who we were talking about leading this thing, he had never been in naval warfare before in his life. Frankly, it was impressive that he even got as far as he did. And they were able to destroy a couple of ships. And long story short, this weird plan for the Spanish to pick up an army on the way, kind of a little out of the way, the army's never able to get to them. And they lose. The Spanish Armada is defeated. And after that, marked the beginning of British supremacy on the seas, which lasted at least 350 years. Amazing. Meanwhile, the Jaguars, there's some nasty turnovers and such, and by the time of it, I think the Tennessee in the second half goes on like a 20. It was score like 23 unanswered, and it's not even close by the end of the day. And the season, the dream season, the season everything had been built up for, done, dead, rested. And since that game, there's been a little conversation because the defensive coordinator for the Titans at that time was a guy by the name of Greg Williams. Greg Williams was also the defensive coordinator for the Saints when the Bounty Gate scandal happened, where they were paying players, thousands of dollars to take out folk and all that kind of such. And rumor has it, allegedly, that Greg Williams had the Jaguars playbook, had their offensive playbook, and that's why they were able to defeat the otherwise undefeated 1999 Jaguars, not once, not twice, but thrice. It's just, that's the urban legend, right? Meanwhile, in Spain, how are they going to get back? A wind pushes them northward, and the previously, gargantuan and, unstoppable, Armada, the wind takes them north up the east coast of the British Isles, and they're forced to go and sail around the top of Scotland, back around Ireland, and limp home. When it's all said and done, the Armada is not defeated, but, at least a third of their ships are gone. It was a cataclysmic failure. And Jaguar fans at the time could have been like, hey, we went 14-2. We had a bad luck. That sucked. That was not ideal to lose to the Tennessee Titans 3 times. But there's always next year, right, guys? Come on. There's always next year. But probably the Spanish thought something similar. It was going to get better. But both for the Spanish and the Jaguars, it would not. And I'll tell you why it was not okay for the Jaguars. Because, remember, we're talking about Tom Coughlin being both the GM and the head coach. Well, there is something called the salary cap here at this time. And the way that Tom Coughlin had structured that team, it really was do or die in 99. Or replace talent quickly, right? And what happened is you were signing huge, aggressive, high-risk, contracts. And when they failed to yield a title there at 1999, you're coming in with cap problems. And in 2001, the Jaguars were $31 million over the cap. I think they were like 25% over the cap. There's a saying called cap hell, salary cap hell. That was first coined by none other than Tom Coughlin around these times. It was, you had a bunch of things. You signed like Carnell Lake to like a 4-year, $18 million year deal. You had Tony Boselli, obviously, on a $26 million extension. In 1999, you had to pay Jimmy Smith. You had to pay, Mark Brunell. You had to pay, and then other folks you just couldn't pay. Keenan McCardell eventually had his, contract. And you had to shed players too, and you just have to hit on everything. Because if you don't, the way it was structured, because Coughlin was the GM, because he wanted to win in 99 so bad, you just had to continue that success, right? And if an injury bug happens or something goes wrong, it's going to be rough. And that's exactly what it was. 2000. The Jaguars go 7-9, miss out on the playoffs. However, they had a wild season. There was injuries, there was this, there was that. But I think it was like the second game, they play against the 2000 Ravens. 2000 Ravens. I mean, the 85 Bears, 13 Seahawks, 2000 Ravens, right? Jacksonville. 17 Jaguars. I mean, just one of the greatest defenses of all time. And they go out and they ball on offense. Jimmy Smith in this game had 15 receptions for 291 yards and 3 touchdowns. They throw it all over the yard on the best defense, arguably in history. And they lose 39-36 or something like that. And it's just like that entire season looking down, it's like, what? How did this go? How did this happen? Fred Taylor has a great season. He runs for 1,400. Jimmy Smith and Keenan McCardell both go for 1,200 yards each. Brunell throwing around. They're 8th in scoring, but that defense just doesn't pick up. Lightning don't strike twice. And, one year you're it, next year you ain't. And Jaguars just ain't it that year. I think they're projected, like looking back on it, like supposed to win like 9 or 10 games, but nope, didn't happen. And then you lose Keenan McCardell going into 2001 season. And so the Jaguars in 2000 go 7-9. They follow it back up with a 6-10 season. Actually, this was Keenan's last year in 2001. Fred Taylor was injured. We had Stacey Mack as our rush leader. Again, eventually, like the luck's going to run out. Of course, Jimmy Smith and Keenan McCardell kept doing it. 1,300 for Jimmy, 1,100 for Keenan. But man, it's just all out of there. All the gas is left to take. And Brunell's getting older, more injured, doesn't have that spark, that slaying mentality we're talking about in 1996 and 1999, just gone. just gone. You know, and we were talking about Coughlin being that disciplinarian, being on Coughlin time. Yeah. And when you're winning, it's easy to be that coach, right? It's easy to be like, hey, if we just listen to what coach says, you know, we all hate his guts, you know, but I respect him. You know, he doesn't, I mean, there's a difference between being a professional and acting professional, right? Coughlin was certainly a professional, but did he act professional to his players all the time? Certainly not. And again, you can buy into that stuff when you're winning, but when you don't, things get out of control. And you can't replicate what once was. You know, and by the time, 2002 rolls around, I think the Texans, got Tony Boselli in the expansion draft. You know, Fred Taylor's still popping off. We ended up drafting, what was his name? R.J. Soward in the year 2000. And to be our next to replace Keenan McCardell, it just don't hit. That's just the first of many, first-round draft misses that Jaguars have. In 2002, just like in 2001, they go 6-10. And it's a sad-ass 6-10 because everyone kind of knows by the end of it that they spent too much money, that got themselves into a crap situation, and what was working before just didn't work anymore. And as soon as it came, it went. And a lot of folks know, about that there was a Spanish Armada, but a lot of folks don't know that there was 3 Spanish Armadas thereafter. One in 1596, one in 1597, and one in 1601 to 1602. And just like the 2000, 2001, and 2002 Jaguars, them Armadas, them ships didn't have the spark they once had. And Spain, from that point on, would only lose territory. And shrivel and shrivel and shrivel over time due to finances, other power players coming in and all that stuff. And they never even sniffed the jockstrap of what they were before going out for that first Spanish Armada. And the Jaguars have had some success, but it's been pretty terrible since. And I just can't help to think, what if you just beat the Titans on that last one? I mean, if you win the title in 99, what happens next? But we're dealing with how we got here because I need therapy. And this was my way to get some of that out. So those are the glory days. And next, we have a new regime. Tom Coughlin gets fired at the end of the 2002 season. And now we actually have a general manager. Oh, hey, wouldn't that have been nice to manage the cap? I'm trying to remember who it was. It wasn't Gene Smith. It was, I think it was Shaq Harris. Shaq Harris was our GM. And we hired Jack Del Rio, a defensive coach, to be our new and second Jaguars head coach. So before we start wrapping this up, again, I want to thank Campione Law for putting this thing on. Again, something happens. Car crash, accident, anything. Give us a shout. We'll be happy to help you. And I'm sorry to end on this dour note, but I have to do it because of this. In 2002, we were talking about sack totals earlier. And we were talking about draft picks earlier that we missed on that wide receiver, R.J. Soward. But in 2001 and 2002, we actually did pretty good. We drafted 2 defensive tackles. Marcus Stroud in 2001 and John Henderson in 2002. And in the 2002 season, our defensive tackles, the big boys in the middle, actually led the team in sacks, both with 6.5. And they were becoming a force. And so, we got these folks coming out. Jimmy Smith's getting older. Keenan McCardell's gone after 2001. Boselli's gone. Let's build around defense. We got a new defensive head coach in Jack Del Rio. And we got Brunell. We got Brunell for another year. And also we have a young guy that we drafted, I believe, in the 3rd round in the 2001 draft. Might have been in 2002. By the name of David Garrard out of Eastern Carolina University. So we got an established pro, and we got someone who's showing promise there as a backup. And we got a new head coach, and we got a new GM. And then the 2003, talk about what ifs. The 2003 draft happens. And I have to laugh because what happened is so ridiculous. So the Jaguars are slated to pick number 8. And the Jaguars, it's Wayne Weaver and the new GM, Shaq Harris. Even though they had David Garrard and Mark Brunell on their roster, they wanted to go big. And they want to get a quarterback and try to, I guess, maybe, relive and, try to, get, just a spark and go, hey, new quarterback leader, to lead us into this new era with a new coach. But it doesn't necessarily work like that. Because I think 2003, who would that have been? I think Carson Palmer was number 1 overall to the Bengals. I think the second quarterback in the most coveted one was Byron Leftwich out of Marshall. Big guy. He showed he was real tough. He played a game like on a broken leg. His teammates carry him down the field, and he's throwing a game-winning drive while people he just kind of showed that toughness that a lot of people can fall for. But we already have some stuff, and we have makings of a good defense. So I'm going to leave you with this what if. Jaguars, like I said, are supposed to pick number 8. And the Vikings, Minnesota Vikings, are picking number 7. And the story goes is that the Vikings are on the clock. They have, I think it's like 5 minutes or whatever. And it's going down. And the Vikings are on the phone with Ozzie Newsome, the general manager of the Baltimore Ravens, to trade the pick so the Ravens can come up to number 7 and select Byron Leftwich. And they're talking and talking and talking. And come to find out, I don't know like what happened, but that was supposed to get done. Like the Vikings thought it was going to be done. And I know the Vikings thought it was going to be done because of what happened next. What happened next is the Vikings let the timer go to 0. And what happens when that happens, right? Well, the Vikings essentially forfeit their turn in line until they can get a pick in. And so I would love to be a fly on the wall at that moment because my understanding is that Jack Del Rio and the coaching staff, so pretty much everyone besides the owner and Shaq Harris, the GM, wanted Terrell Suggs. Hall of Famer Terrell Suggs. Now, pairing Terrell Suggs with his pass rush abilities, there with John Henderson and Marcus Stroud on the interior of the defense, whoo-wee, that's a different kind of team. That's nothing like the 90s Jaguars. That's new millennium, right? George W. Bush, new president, new team, defense focus. Let's go. We already got David Garrard and Mark Brunell on the roster. But when the clock ran 0, it was pretty much a mad dash because every team that picked and had their pick and turned it in got to skip the Vikings, who were supposed to be trading with the Ravens for Byron Leftwich. So the Jaguars ran up and put in Byron Leftwich when probably 99 times out of 100, the Ravens trade up with the Vikings, select Byron Leftwich, and then we get Terrell Suggs. And who knows what happens next? But I know what happens next in our real timeline. It is a season of suctitude. It is a misery-ridden landscape that will last the next 14 seasons with a glimmer or two popped in. And we're going to get that on a different podcast. We're going to do a part 2 and a part 3 of like the history. But remember, I need therapy. And just talking about what we once were, trying to put it in perspective, is really, really important before we start talking about Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas Jr. and, Travis Hunter and, all the fun stuff, and we got plenty of more of that to come here in future episodes. We're going to be talking about the offense. We're going to be talking about the defense. We're going to be talking about the coaching change. We're going to talk about Travis Hunter. And I'm really looking forward to doing that with all y'all. So, before I go, I used to watch The Price is Right when I was a kid. And every time that The Price is Right ended, Bob Barker, the old host of that, would like end with like a public service announcement. He would say, like, don't forget to spray and neuter your cats and dogs or something like that. And he would say it every time. I thought that was actually kind of cool. So I'm going to do something similar. I'm an attorney. I do represent folks who are injured in car accidents. Here's some advice for you. Buy insurance. Buy insurance. Standing for uninsured motorist coverage. It's real important because, frankly, the folks that cause accidents ain't got the best insurance. So what's going to protect you if their insurance doesn't cover you? That's uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage. It'll raise your monthly rate, but it'll be worth it when you get in an accident that you didn't have for. You didn't ask for. So that's my PSA. Again, thanks y'all for tuning in to the first episode of the Unofficial Jacksonville Jaguars Podcast. More episodes to come, but I'm going to leave you with a little bit of entertainment. All right. Started at 95, just trying to make our name. By 96, we're playing in the AFC Championship game. 97, 98, we kept that fire burning bright. 99 was our Armada, thought we ruled all night. Oh, the cat came crashing in 2000, left us cold. In 01, our roster's bones were sold. Bow to the Empire gone, Coughlin reign was through. Now I'm out here wailing these Duval blues for you. Woo! Thank you all very much.